Hi, it's Linda Fox. I'm here with PhocusWire and I'm with Aaron Gowell and he's Chief Conductor at SilverRail Technologies. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's always fun.
So just to start with, why would you say rail hasn't digitalized in the same way air always has?
There are two main reasons. One, commercial airlines got together and created standards for the space early on because they're for-profit businesses. Rail lines were military assets back in the day, and the last thing you want German trains and French trains to do is work together.
Yeah.
So you want these things on different systems. So there was never a natural commercial reason to work together. That's part of it, and therefore, each of these countries grew up building their own standards. So in fact, when you go into St. Pancras Station, if you're looking at a French train coming in or at a British train coming in, they're actually using different codes for what that is. And unless you, like for Heathrow Airport, call it LHR, when it's called LHR, you can connect systems together.
Sure.
And when they're not, they miss each other. So that's a big component to this. And I think the other side is that, and I think this is interesting, that in the rail space, as a marketplace, if you look at air or hotel, there were a whole series of really good IT companies that came along to help those companies distribute their products. So you have the GDS companies like Amadeus and those things. And they're actually, in fact, spun out of airlines, right? The rail industry never spun out any real technology companies to help them out. And so, therefore, there are very few companies like us that are trying to tackle this problem from scratch.
So what does it
and
take
I think it's the lack of the IT companies that's quite interesting in the rail space.
So what's it going to take to move the needle then?
In terms of
the technology, I mean, if there's just a few players, and it must be quite difficult to knock on doors.
It definitely is. It takes more time. It's interesting. I really like one of the quotes that Brent Hoberman was talking about how. One of the great things about being an entrepreneur is a bit about being naive once you get into a space because you're just brave to try to solve a problem. And I think that happened for us too. We were a bit naive about how tough this space would be to actually accelerate where we see other spaces, and this is my third tech company, I've seen other businesses just rocket out of the gates. This is taking much more time because I think in part, rail lines have a real social mission, right? They're trying to move people around in their countries.
Yeah.
They're not trying to run for profit.
Right.
And so they're much more considered and it just takes more time. But having said that, I think there are a number of really good IT companies in the space now. There's ourselves, there's a company called Skills, and there are a couple of interesting startups that have come on in the space. So it is accelerating on the IT side, but it will take much more investment in this side. Like there isn't an Amadeus that's really investing hundreds of millions in the IT side yet. So, but it is accelerating.
And what will be the drivers? Will it be the push from consumers, the move to mobile? What's going to make us?
It will be. A lot of our mission is about getting rail exposed and out of what I call the e-commerce dark. Because if you go on to even Expedia, which is our largest investor, or any of the other major OTAs, Booking, et cetera, rail is just not really shown yet. So we want to get it exposed. And I think if it is exposed, then people will start to use it even more. So for example, if you're on an OTA and you're an American and you're saying, hey, I'm going to go visit my family in the UK, and you fly into London, and let's say you have an aunt that lives up in Manchester, you do a search on an OTA between London and Manchester, it's going to come back with airlines to take on that route. It's going to say fly British Airways. And that's just not actually the best way to get there. The Virgin train is the best way to get there. But you don't know that unless it's exposed to you. So I view one of the real catalysts for adoption is about building out a platform where we're aggregating enough rail so that people like Expedia and the other big OTAs, Ctrip, et cetera, will expose rail up to their consumer base. I think that will be the big catalyst.
So interesting that you mentioned Ctrip there, and obviously they've got their TrainPal app in the UK. Do you worry, does it concern you that they will just come in and just in a sort of winner-takes-all approach because of the way they do things?
I have not seen that yet around the rail space. I'm not concerned about them in the rail space. I've seen a lot of people throw a lot of time and money up against this space and not having been that successful. Meaning, you can't just simply roll in with capital and solve this problem. You have to have real expertise. So for example, just in our own company, We've got a little over 200 people in the business. We counted up the numbers the other day. We have 1,462 man years of experience in rail. You have to have real depth. You have to build empathy and support with carriers. You've got to be seen as their partner. You can't just roll in and say, hey, I'm here, C-Trip, and I'm going to sell your tickets.
Right.
You've really got to convince SNCF that you're helpful to them. And that's actually, in fact, part of why we stayed out of the consumer side of it and have really focused on the B2B side to see if we can't help them technically as companies and really be seen as partners and enabling them. So I'm not that concerned.
Do you have more traction in that sense? Is it easier for you to go in and talk to the SNCFs and the Renfes of this world?
It is, and it's gotten easier as we have really built credibility in this space. Like, we've been very consistent about building better and better products and helping these guys out. So, for example, I think about kind of two big problems. One is around distribution, and we have built a single platform for distributing rail, and that's being exposed in places that the rail lines have not seen before, and they value seeing their products up in spaces where that hasn't been. And the second thing is on the IT side. Like, we're really good at things like building fast search engines for rail specific products, we power most of the UK now. We're actually writing algorithms and building really fast search engines, and that helps people find stuff. If you think about the air in the old days, ITA Software, the reason it was such a powerful company was they built, they gave you full availability 90 days out, and you could really see all of your travel options, and that really increased conversion. And we're doing the exact same thing on the rail side, and that helps you build credibility and gets people like SNCF saying, okay, you really are a great partner here. So to SNCF's new distribution connection, we're the first company to have connected in and partnered and distributed on that new platform, which is sort of their way of going around the GDS companies and opening up new channels. But they're looking at us and they're like, wow, we've never seen anybody connect our platforms in 3 months. Okay. Usually it takes like a year to tie in. And we moved really quickly. And because we've done it over and over again, we're getting a little bit better and a little bit better. And that's really helped us build an expertise in the rail space. And that's kind of our defensibility, frankly.
Okay, so I understand that actually there isn't, commercially there's not a huge impetus to do cross-border ticketing and services because there just isn't the demand. But is it a sort of chicken and egg situation? How do you drive that forward?
Yeah, it is a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. And I would add on top of that, I think something that is changing is the deregulation that's happening around what they call the fourth railway package. Is going to make it so that a foreign carrier can come into a country and go run on internal routes, right? In the air industry, as we all know, a foreign carrier cannot go in and fly inside of the US, say LA to New York, right? But the rail lines will be able to do that. So in fact, it's interesting. Rail's taking a leap beyond the air industry in terms of deregulation. And I think that's very forward thinking. But when you're in that case, the carriers are now saying, well, and this is a real example, so we power the Swedish rail system for all their transactions. The carrier SJ is going to go into new markets, right? And now they think they need to be thinking about not just the internals of their own country, but about how they retail in with another country. And when they do that, having us there to be able to say, SJ, if you're running a train on this particular route in Germany or in France, we also have French and German content. We can help you move people beyond just those two stations and help make rail a more seamless experience here. But I think that deregulation is getting the carriers to think about what it means to operate in other markets. And I think that will also be something that accelerates in the space.
I know that you guys have been talking a little bit about mobility as a service as perhaps one way that we might foster more cooperation, accelerate development. And I think there is a great model for that in Sweden. There's some other pockets around Europe, I think Berlin, Copenhagen.
Yeah.
Just talk a little bit about how that might push things along.
Well, if we're talking about mobility as a service and we're talking about multimodal journey planning and things like that, I'm personally really fascinated about this. There are a lot of really good multimodal tools that are helping people think about how you move in a region. So I use Citymapper in London, and it's the single best tool by far. It's vastly better than Google Maps, I think. But you can't book a ticket on it, right? And so I think the holy grail here is how do you match up these modes with search? Because in fact, that's actually quite easy. But then thinking about how you normalize the booking process that sits underneath that, a bus to a train to a car, and making those so that you can do single purchases, that's an area where we as a company, as a booking platform, it's designed to work with different modes of transit, because a different rail line, two different rail lines is kind of the same as a rail line and a bus line, meaning it's two things and you're trying to normalize it and make it all work together. Having said that, I'm not sure where the commercial spark is going to come from, like why that's really going to get out there. Is somebody going to build a brand around that?
Right.
Or is that going to get licensed by a regional transit authority?
Are people going to argue about it for a while?
Yeah, I actually think, so I was really excited about this stuff about 2 years ago, and it's tailored off a little bit for me because I'm just not sure commercially how people are going to make this really work. So Citymapper is a fabulous tool. Waze was a really great platform for a car, but neither of those make any revenue, right?
No,
There's zero revenue.
Yeah.
So what do you do? How do you make this a real commercial model? Why would Expedia adopt something that really doesn't have a commercial angle to it? It might be an interesting feature for consumers, but I've yet to see how this turns into a business, and I think that's one of the challenging things in the mobility side.
And is there no sort of fear that if we don't do it, if we don't get on with it, then somebody else will?
Potentially. Frankly, I would love to see somebody get on with it.
Yeah.
I would love to see a company succeed in this space. It's interesting. A lot of people often say, well, aren't you fearful that somebody's going to do better? And I'm like, I look at this as a community problem.
Sure.
I do not want people flying. I want rail to be first. One of the friction points around rail, frankly, is the fear of like, okay, well, what happens on the other end? Or how do I get there? How do I know I'm going to get to my train on time? So people who are
First and last mile type
first
stuff.
and last mile type stuff. And so anybody who comes in and can help that and eliminate the friction and lower the fear level, that is really, really helpful and will help drive adoption. So I hope we see more companies invested in that side of the equation.
Okay, final question, and it's not a rail one. You said recently in a piece you wrote for us that it was if you could like to take over Tesla. What would you do on your first day?
What would I do on my first day with Tesla after firing the current CEO? No, I love Elon Musk. I think he's brilliant. I think one of the first things Tesla needs to figure out is how to build some real partnerships inside the industry. They've really been running as a solo act for a long time. They're really poorly capitalized as a business. They're in real financial trouble on that side. And I think Musk has really lost a lot of his best team. And I think that's unfortunate. I think it's such a brilliant business. And it's a catalyst for change in the world, right? And I think, now we're seeing them invest in the idea of 18-wheeler type trucks. As soon as there's one good, cheap electric 18-wheeler, all other 18-wheelers will be electric. And I think that's incredibly important for our world. So I'm such a big fan of the catalyst side of what he's doing.
Yeah, first mover, but not necessarily with an advantage.
Not necessarily of the cars themselves, but I absolutely love the transformation that it's driving. It's causing everybody. You look at Volvo now. Volvo has stated all new cars will be electric. Why?
Yeah.
Because of Tesla. And so I love the fact that they're making everybody else move. I think it's just a terrific space to really pay attention to.
Thanks so much for joining us, Aaron.
Thank you for this. Thank you.